It was 41 degrees on Thanksgiving morning. My stepmother locked me out of my own childhood home because I told her the stuffing was dry. That's it. That's the whole crime. I had driven 6 hours from Columbus with a cracked windshield and a check engine light that had been on since August. I brought a pecan pie from the bakery on 5th because she always said my homemade ones were too dense. I brought wine I couldn't afford. I brought a smile I had been practicing in the rearview mirror for the last 40 miles. I told her the stuffing was dry, and she told my father, and my father told me to take a walk and cool down. And then I heard the deadbolt slide home behind me. I want you to drop a comment right now and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is. Because I need to know someone is out there. I need to know I'm not telling this story into the void. I was standing on the porch in a cardigan and socks. No coat. No keys. No phone because my phone was on the kitchen counter charging next to the gravy boat. It was getting dark. The kind of dark that comes fast in November in western Pennsylvania, like someone pulling a curtain across the sky. I could see the warm light through the front window. I could see my stepsister Vanessa sitting cross-legged on the living room floor, going through the box I'd carried in from my car. The box was my mother's things in it, her jewelry, her handwritten recipes, the small oil painting she did of the creek behind our house the summer before she got sick. Vanessa was holding up a bracelet and showing it to her boyfriend like it was something she'd found at a flea market. I knocked on the door. My father looked up from the couch, made eye contact with me through the glass panel, and looked back at the television. I sat down on the porch steps. The cold from the concrete came up through my jeans immediately. I thought, this is not real. People do not get locked out of their childhood homes on Thanksgiving for saying the stuffing was dry. I thought I must have missed something. I must have done something worse than I remember. I went back through the conversation in my mind the way you replay a car accident, looking for the moment you could have turned the wheel. There wasn't one. The stuffing was dry. I said so. And that was enough. A black SUV pulled up to the curb 40 minutes later. I didn't recognize it at first. It was newer than anything that usually came down our street. Tinted windows. Quiet engine. The kind of car that doesn't announce itself. The rear door opened and a woman stepped out wearing a charcoal wool coat and moving like someone who had not hurried anywhere in 20 years. My Aunt Renata. I hadn't seen her in 9 years. She didn't look at the house right away. She looked at me first. At my socks on the concrete. At my arms wrapped around myself. At my face, which I can only imagine looked like something left out in the rain too long. She took in all of it without blinking, without any of the exaggerated horror people perform when they want you to know they care. She just looked. Quietly. The way a doctor looks at an X-ray. Then she looked at the house. Of course, she said. She walked to the SUV, opened the rear door wider, and pulled out a heavy camel coat. She walked it over to me and placed it around my shoulders without asking. It smelled like cedar and something expensive I couldn't name. Come sit in the car, she said. You look like you're about to make bad decisions out of spite, and I need you warm before you do anything useful. I didn't argue. My feet were numb. Inside the SUV, it was warm in a way that felt almost aggressive after the porch, the leather seats, the heat coming up from the floor. A man was sitting in the front passenger seat, and he turned to give me a brief professional nod before facing forward again. He was wearing a suit on Thanksgiving. He had a slim leather portfolio on his lap. Renata sat beside me and closed the door. She had not been in my life. I want to be clear about that because it matters. She was my mother's older sister. After my mother died, she and my father had a falling out. I was never fully told the details of, and she had disappeared from our family the way people disappear when they decide the cost of staying is too high. I had been 17. I hadn't had the tools to chase after anyone. I had barely had the tools to get dressed in the morning. For 9 years she had been a Christmas card. Sometimes not even that. How did you know I was out here? I asked. She didn't answer immediately. She looked out the window at the house, at the warm yellow light, at my father's silhouette moving past the living room window, relaxed, unhurried. "Your neighbor called me," she said. "Mrs. Alderman. She still has my number from when your mother and I used to coordinate the block association." She paused. "She said she'd been watching you sit on those steps for half an hour, and your father hadn't come to the door once." I didn't know what to say to that. I didn't know Mrs. Alderman had ever had Renata's number. I didn't know my mother and Renata had run a block association together. I realized I didn't know very much at all about the life my mother had before she got sick, before she was just my mother, before she was the woman in the hospital bed asking me to make sure her jewelry stayed together. "They were going through her things," I said. "Vanessa was." Through the box. Renata's jaw tightened. It was the only visible reaction. "I know." She had the bracelet, the one Mom wore every day, the gold one with the small. "I know which one." She said it quietly, not cutting me off, just confirming that she knew, that she had been paying attention to things from a distance for a long time. "He thinks I'm being dramatic," I said. I could hear it already. The speech he would give when the door eventually opened, the measured disappointment, the way he would sigh and look at the ceiling like I was an administrative burden. "You're so sensitive, sweetheart. You always have been. Your mother worried about that." Renata turned to look at me then. Her eyes were very still. My mother's eyes had been like that too, that same quality of being fully present without any performance of presence. It caught me off guard every time with her. "He is not going to give a speech tonight," she said. "He always gives a speech. Not tonight." She reached forward and touched the shoulder of the man in the front seat. "Whenever you're ready, Gerald." Gerald, the man with the portfolio, nodded and opened his door. "Who is he?" I asked. "He is the attorney who has been managing your mother's estate for the past 9 years, Renata said. "And tonight he is going to introduce himself to your father for the first time." I stared at her. My mother's estate. Yes, my mother didn't have an estate. Didn't have an estate. We lived in this house. We had a station wagon and a vegetable garden and your mother had a life insurance policy, a brokerage account and a property trust, Renata said evenly, "none of which your father was the beneficiary of. All of which have been in holding since you were 17, structured to transfer when you turn 30. She looked at me. "When is your birthday, Lily?" My throat tightened. 3 weeks ago." She nodded once, slowly, like she had been waiting a long time for this particular Tuesday in November. 3 weeks ago," she repeated, "and I have been trying to reach you for 3 weeks. You changed your number." "I changed my number because..." I stopped. "Because my father had asked me to. Because he said my old contacts were people from a chapter I needed to close. Because I had believed him. I had believed so many things he had told me about who I was and who I should be talking to and what parts of my past were worth carrying forward." "I know why you changed it," Renata said. She did not say it unkindly. She said it the way you acknowledge a thing that has already happened and cannot be revised. "Mrs. Alderman found me on Facebook." I almost laughed. My mother's estate. Facebook. Gerald with his leather portfolio on Thanksgiving. "I don't understand," I said. "Why didn't Mom tell me?" "She did," Renata said. "She left you a letter. It's in the portfolio. She wrote it 2 weeks before she passed." She looked back at the house. She knew your father would remark. She had known him a long time. She wanted to make sure that whatever happened, you had something of your own that no one could hand you and no one could take away. Outside, Gerald was at the front door. I watched him knock. Not the way you knock when you're asking for something, the way you knock when you're announcing something. My father answered in 30 seconds. He had not answered the door for me in 40 minutes. I could not hear what was being said. I watched my father's posture change. His hand on the door frame first, casual, then dropping, then his chin lifting, the way it did when he was recalibrating, when the story he had been telling himself hit a fact that didn't fit. He looked out at the SUV. He looked directly at me through the tinted glass. I don't think he could see me, but I could see him perfectly. Renata said, "Are you warm enough?" "Yes," I said. "Good." She opened her door. "Come with me. I need you in the room when he reads the summary. You might wonder how I ended up back here at all. 6 hours, cracked windshield, artificial smile. You might wonder what kind of person drives back to a place that has never once made her feel like she belonged. The answer isn't complicated. It's just embarrassing. After my mother died, I was 17 and my father was grieving, and I thought if I stayed close, I could hold the shape of the family together by sheer will. I was wrong, but I didn't know that yet. Then he met Carolyn. Then Carolyn moved in with her daughter Vanessa. Then the house that had been my mother's house became their house, and I became the guest with the complicated feelings who needed to learn to be more flexible. I went to college in state to save money and came home every break because I thought it was what you did. I took a job in Columbus for the health insurance, not the career path. I called every Sunday. I sent birthday cards. I drove 6 hours on a holiday with a pie I could not afford from a bakery. I could not afford because I was still trying, at 29, at 30, to earn a place in a family that had already quietly told me there wasn't one for me. The last 3 years had been an education in smallness. Carolyn's comments about my apartment, my car, my job, my clothing, delivered with the bright precision of someone who has decided that honesty is the same thing as cruelty, if the cruelty is cheerful enough. My father's habit of telling the same story at every dinner about the time I quit the debate team sophomore year, always framed as an endearing example of my tendency to give up on things. Vanessa treating my childhood bedroom like a storage unit and then apologizing with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I had been adjusting, shrinking, taking up less and less space so that they had nothing to complain about, and they found new things to complain about, and I made myself smaller still, and the door kept locking. It didn't start with the stuffing. Of course it didn't. That's never how it starts. My father was in the hallway when Renata and I came through the front door. He had recovered some of his composure. He was wearing the expression he used for situations he intended to manage. Warm eyes, slight smile, hands relaxed at his sides. "Renata," he said, "this is a surprise." "Hello, Richard," she said. The warmth in his expression cooled by several degrees. Carolyn appeared from the kitchen doorway, wiping her hands on a dish towel, and stopped when she saw my aunt. She had never met Renata. She had only heard my father's version of Renata, which I now understood was probably a version constructed to explain an absence that benefited him. "We were just finishing up dinner," Carolyn said. "If you called ahead, we could have—" "I don't need dinner," Renata said. "I need the dining room table and about 20 minutes of everyone's attention." She said it pleasantly. The pleasantness was not warmth. It was the pleasantness of someone who has already decided what is going to happen and is extending courtesy as a formality before it does. We sat around the table where I had eaten Thanksgiving dinner every year of my childhood. My mother's chair was the one Carolyn always sat in now. I noticed that. I noticed Vanessa come down the stairs and take a seat without being asked, the way you take a seat when you understand something is about to happen that involves you. Her boyfriend stayed upstairs. Smart. Gerald opened the portfolio. He introduced himself. He named the firm. He laid 3 documents on the table and explained, briefly and without drama, what each one was. The first was the insurance policy. My mother had taken it out 2 years before she was diagnosed when I was in middle school when she was 34 years old and apparently thinking about contingencies. The beneficiary was a trust. The trust beneficiary was me. The second was the brokerage account. My mother had been investing since her 20s, not large amounts, careful, steady amounts, managed quietly for a long time. The account had a name I didn't recognize on it, her maiden name, from before she married my father. Gerald had managed it. It had compounded. The number on the document was one I had to read twice. The third document was the one that made my father's face go very still. It was the deed to the house. My mother had bought this house. I had not known that. I had assumed, the way children assume things that no one has told them directly, that it belonged to both of them equally and then to my father after she died. But my mother had purchased this house 4 years before she met my father, with a down payment from her own savings, and it had stayed in her name. And when she updated her estate documents at the end of her life, she had placed it in the same trust as everything else. For me, this is incorrect, my father said. He said it quietly. He said it the way people say things when they already know they are incorrect. I've been paying the mortgage on this house the mortgage was paid off 11 years ago, Gerald said, not looking up from his documents. Your contributions to the household have been noted and will be addressed separately, but the property itself is not now and has not been in your name. I was never told that. You were listed as a cohabitant on the original estate summary provided to you by the previous firm in 2015, Gerald said. If there was a miscommunication, that is a matter for a different conversation. Tonight I'm here to inform the current beneficiary of her assets. My father looked at me. I had been sitting very still. I had been sitting the way you sit when the world is reorganizing itself around you, and you are afraid that if you move, it will stop, and you will wake up on the porch in your socks again. You knew about this, he said. I found out 19 minutes ago, I said. He shook his head. He had the expression he got when a story wasn't adding up the way he needed it to, when the facts were refusing to cooperate with the narrative. Your mother and I were partners. She would not have. She did, Renata said. He looked at her. Something passed between them that I didn't have the full context for but understood the shape of. She didn't trust you, Renata said. Not cruelly, factually. She loved you. I think she did. But she did not trust you with her daughter's future, and she made arrangements accordingly. That's not a statement I'm making. That's a legal document on the table. Carolyn said, This is insane. Richard, you need to call our attorney. You're welcome to do that, Gerald said, clicking his pen closed. In the meantime, Ms. Meinck. Hartwell, he looked at me, is the sole owner of this property as of her 30th birthday. If you'd like me to walk through the transition timeline, I would, I said. My own voice surprised me. It was steady. It didn't feel like my voice. It felt like something I had borrowed from my mother, from Renata, from the woman in the hospital bed who had apparently been quietly building me a parachute for 20 years while I had no idea I was going to need one. Gerald nodded and began to explain what happened next. My father interrupted twice. Gerald waited out both interruptions with the patience of a man who had sat in a great many rooms with a great many people who did not like what he had to say, and then continued. Carolyn stood up once and said she needed air and came back and sat down again. Vanessa did not say anything. She was looking at me from across the table with an expression I had never seen on her face before. I think it was recalibration. I think she was revising in real time what she had decided I was worth. When Gerald finished, there was a long silence. My father said, Lily, whatever you're thinking about doing, I am your father. I know, I said. This house is your home. It is, I said. It's my home. He nodded, something loosening in his posture. He thought I was agreeing with him. He was already reaching for the angle, the place where the story could shift back to his advantage, which is why I said, I'm going to need you to find somewhere else to be by the end of the month. The loosening stopped. 30 days, I said. I had listened carefully to Gerald's timeline. I had heard the part about proper notice. I was not my father. I was not going to skip the steps. That's more than enough time to make arrangements. Gerald's office will send the formal notice tomorrow. You can't. Carolyn started. She can, Gerald said. He was closing the portfolio. He said it without looking up, the way you state something that does not require argument. My father's voice dropped. It got very quiet and very specific. The way it got when he was past the stage of performing and into something realer and less practiced. After everything I have done for you, after I kept this family together, After you locked me out of my own house on Thanksgiving, I said, in 41 degrees, in my socks. He opened his mouth. I knocked for 40 minutes, I said. I could see you through the window. You looked at me once. The room was very quiet. I pushed back my chair. My legs were still cold from the concrete. I was wearing my mother's coat, Renata's coat, and it was warm and heavy and felt like something solid in a room that had suddenly lost all its walls. I'm not asking you to leave tonight, I said. It's Thanksgiving. I am not my father. I looked at Carolyn. I looked at Vanessa. I looked at the chair where my mother used to sit. But I am asking you to understand what has happened here. This was never your house. It was always hers. And now it's mine. And I would like you to treat it accordingly for the next 30 days. I picked up the deed from the table. My name was on it, Lily Ann Hartwell. It had always been there. It had just been waiting for me to be old enough to know better and ready. I thought about every Sunday call, every pie I couldn't afford, every hour I'd spent trying to fit myself into a space that had been engineered to exclude me. I thought about my mother at 34, taking out a life insurance policy, thinking quietly about contingencies. I thought about how well she had known all of us, how clearly she had seen it. She built this for you, Renata said quietly beside me. She wasn't looking at my father or Carolyn. She was looking at me. She started building it before she even knew she was sick. She just knew. I folded the deed and held it. Carolyn was whispering something to my father. He was not listening. He was looking at me with the expression of someone who has just understood that the game they thought they were winning has been over for a very long time. I walked to the front door and opened it. The cold air came in. It smelled like November and wood smoke and the particular quiet of a neighborhood on a holiday when everyone else is warm inside. I stood in the doorway, my doorway, and I breathed it in. Behind me, I heard Vanessa say very quietly, I'm sorry, about the box, about your mom's stuff. I didn't turn around. Leave the bracelet on the kitchen counter before you go to bed. A pause. Okay. I stepped out onto the porch. The concrete was cold through my socks again, but I didn't mind it this time. I stood where I'd been sitting for 40 minutes in the dark, and I looked out at the street, at Mrs. Alderman's house with the light on in the kitchen, at the black SUV still at the curb, at the bare November trees. Renata came to stand beside me. What do I do with a house? I said. She considered this seriously. Whatever you want. I stopped. I don't know anything about any of this. The trust, the account, the Gerald will walk you through everything. That's his job. He's been waiting 9 years to do it. I looked at the door. The deadbolt I had heard slide home. The door I had knocked on for 40 minutes. She really did all this, I said. She really did. She never told me. She didn't want you carrying it, Renata said. She knew how you were. She knew you'd spend your whole life deferring to it, being careful not to make anyone feel bad about it, shrinking yourself around it. She wanted you to have it when you were ready, not when you needed it as a consolation prize, as a foundation. I thought about that for a long time, or it felt like a long time. It was probably 30 seconds. I'm going to call Gerald on Monday, I said. He's expecting it, and I want to know everything. The whole estate. I want to understand every piece of it. He'll spend as many hours as it takes. And I stopped. Looked at her, this woman who had been a Christmas card and sometimes not even that. I want to know about her. The parts I didn't know, the block association, the accounts, who she was before she was my mother. Renata's face did something complicated. It settled into something that was close to grief and close to relief at the same time. Like a window being opened in a room that has been closed for too long. I have stories, she said. I have a lot of stories. Okay, I exhaled. Okay. I pulled the coat tighter around me. Inside, through the window, I could see my father sitting at the dining table. He was not looking at the documents. He was not talking to Carolyn. He was just sitting there in the emergency yellow light of a holiday that had not gone the way he planned, and he looked, for the first time in my memory, like exactly the size he actually was. Not a king, not a patriarch, not the man who owned the room, just a man at a table that had never been his. I reached for the door handle, pulled it shut behind me with a firm, quiet click, not a slam. I didn't need a slam. I walked down the porch steps and got into the warm car and let Renata close the door. "Where to?" Gerald asked. I looked at the house through the window. My house, my mother's house, the house that had been quietly mine this whole time while I sat on its steps in the dark. "Nowhere yet," I said. "I just want to sit here for a minute." He nodded and put the car in park. I sat in the warmth. I held the deed. I thought about my mother at 34 deciding quietly, without drama, to build her daughter something no one could take away. Then I took out my phone and I texted Mrs. Alderman, "Thank you. I mean it. Thank you." 3 dots appeared. Then, "Your mama would be proud, sweetheart. She always said you were the tough one. You just didn't know it yet." I put the phone down. Outside, the November dark was total and soft and completely mine. If you've ever been locked out of a place that was always yours, drop a comment below. I want to hear from you. And if this story found you when you needed it, share it. Someone out there is still sitting on the steps. Let them know the car is coming. I've been thinking about cause and effect a lot since that night on the porch. Not in an abstract way, in a very specific, concrete way. The kind of thinking you do when you're holding a deed to a house you didn't know was yours and trying to trace backward how you got there. My father made a choice every time he looked through that window and didn't open the door. Not once, but over and over, in small accumulated increments across years. The way he interrupted me at dinner. The way he told the debate team story. The way he handed Carolyn the keys to a life my mother had built and let her redecorate it while I kept calling every Sunday, bringing pies I couldn't afford, pretending the house still had room for me. Every one of those choices had a consequence. He just assumed the consequences would land on me. He was wrong. That's what I keep coming back to. There's something I've learned about people who mistake control for strength. They stop paying attention. They get comfortable. They pour their scotch and raise their glass and stop watching the driveway because they've decided they've already won. And that blindness, that settled certainty that they are the axis everything else rotates around, is exactly what undoes them. Not someone else's revenge, their own inattention. My mother understood that. She had understood it for a very long time. She didn't fight it. She didn't argue or demand or make scenes. She just quietly, methodically built something her daughter could stand on when the floor gave out. She made phone calls I didn't know about. She signed documents I didn't know existed. She chose an attorney and said, "Manage this until she's ready," and then she let it go. That took more strength than anything I've ever done. To build something you won't live to see used. To trust the future that much. I think about Renata driving across the state on Thanksgiving because a neighbor called her on Facebook. 9 years of silence, and she came without hesitating. That's what integrity looks like when it's been sitting quietly in a person for a long time, not performing itself, just waiting. She didn't have to come. There was no advantage in it for her. She came because it was right, and because my mother had asked her to look out for me in the only way she could. And because some people actually keep their word, even when the word was made to a woman who was no longer alive to hold them to it. That matters to me. It matters more than the house, more than the trust account, more than any of it. The knowledge that my mother chose her people correctly, that the woman she trusted kept that trust for 9 years and then showed up at the right moment with a coat and a plan and enough patience to let me figure out what I wanted to do. What I want to do is not let it make me hard. That's the thing I'm most careful about now. It would be easy to become someone who closes doors and draws curtains and keeps warm by keeping others out. I know how that story ends. I watched it happen in real time from a very cold porch. I'm 30 years old. I have a house. I have a foundation my mother built on purpose, and I have a responsibility to use it the way she intended, not as a trophy, not as a weapon, but as something that lets me stand straight and make choices from solid ground, instead of from fear and scarcity, and the desperate need to be let back in. My father is not a monster. He's a man who chose comfort over conscience for long enough that he forgot they were different things. That choice has consequences, so does mine. I choose differently, starting now.